Nancy Houser-Bluhm, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you. Almost
Three,
3 years to the
yeah,
date, you said.
3 years and 3 days, January 5th of 2022. We chatted about Whispers for Terra.
Yep.
And here we are talking about your brand new, relatively new, came out last summer,
Yep.
the Nickel Loop. Yeah,
hmm Uh-huh.
fantastic. Well, let's just dive right in. Tell us about the Nickel Loop. It sounds like we got some time travel on our hands.
Yes, it's a time travel romance where the two main characters come from two different eras and both find themselves in the year 1938. So it's a romance, but it's also a historical fiction because it takes place in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. And I really did, try to do a deep dive in being authentic with what Glenwood Springs was like at the time and where that wasn't accurate, where I didn't stick to it completely. It was accurate to the era of 1938 across America. So, yeah, so it's a fun time travel romance that really does get into the time travel mystery of it in order to, of course, bring them back together because it's a romance. So,
And so they meet from two different eras in
yes,
1988. And
yes.
so tell us
So,
about your two main characters.
So Emmeline is a young woman from 2022, and she is going to visit her sister in Glenwood Springs, taking the train over. And her father died a couple years earlier, and she's been kind of closed off since then. She was close to him more so than her sister and her mother. And she has a coin collection that they shared that she's taking with her to Glenwood Springs to go through with her sister. And then Nicholas is in the year 1898, and he finds himself in 1938, and they arrive at just about the exact same time and meet up within a day's time of their getting there the same day. They stumble on each other going to the Hotel Denver or Denver Hotel. I can never remember which one it is, right on across from the train station, and discover that they both have, this traumatic event that they're trying to figure out. So
Yeah.
there, and he's kind of he is an educated man from 1898 and more, and I'd say an advanced thinker. I didn't want to go the Yellowstone or the old, everything was violent and, you know, hickish, back in 1898 because it wasn't, I was surprised how much there was. Uh, you think of it as being an old Western, but there is more to that era too than we give credit to sometimes in our modern day Westerns.
So he leaps ahead about 40 years
Yep.
and he goes back about almost 80 or
hmm
almost, yeah. How did you settle on 1938? What appealed to you about that year?
Well, it started out in kind of a different story, and that is a year that was very hot in the summertime in 1938, and I had an aunt and uncle that got married that year. So some reason that has just always appealed to me. And then as it's funny, once you start to notice something, 1938 would pop out. I found a license plate with 1938 on it. I was in Italy and there was a wine um, wine rack that had old bottles and one was from vintage 1938. So it just kind of solidified that it was the year I wanted to be.
Yeah. What was the appeal about time travel for you? Have you always been a fan of time travel stories?
I think I have. I just had somebody tell me that they had just um, finished the book, and they were telling somebody else about it. And this guy had said that sounds like a book series called Half Magic. So when I was a child, there was a series that was very popular, and I don't even know how many books there were, but probably 6 or 7, kind of like the Magic Treehouse books of today for kids. And it was about a brother and sister that each had parts of a coin. And when they were together, they would time travel. And they'd go to different eras and, experience different things. And so I devoured that series and loved it. And then I've always, yeah, and most movies that have time travel in it and many books that have time travel. And I tend towards time travel to the past more than I do time travel to the future. And so most of those I feel like I've read or seen, yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do love time travel, but it never really occurred to me to write it until I got a prompt on Instagram about if you could write a Christmas story, which this didn't turn out to be, but if you could write a Christmas story, what would it be? And I was like, I'd write a time travel romance. So that's kind of where it
Yeah.
morphed into.
What was the biggest challenge for you in writing a time travel? To me, it would always, not that, I mean, I don't know if I ever would, but because I always struggle just as a reader, just to, buy the concept or buy the conceit. But I've read some time travel books, of course, and, it's interesting challenge. But what was the biggest challenge for you? For me, it would be like how much to keep emphasizing the things that they know about the future for her, going
Right.
back and
Yes.
how to
Well,
keep that to yourself.
yes. So that was definitely, and even what to include, because in M-Line going back to 1938, the 1930s were so jam-packed with events, and then World War II was looming. And so what to focus on was a big thing. And because like with Whispers for Terra, this kind of like sub story was about the soil, condition of our soils on Earth. And this one was um, about the food delivery system and how it really started to change in the 1930s with refrigeration and that type of thing, and how it got to where we are today. So there's like a thread through that. But probably the biggest challenge was really trying to make it believable, but not too sciency, and because people would say, they just have to be able to suspend disbelief. That's all you need them to do. And that's what happens in a lot of time travel books. They don't tell you why going through that cloud makes them go back in time, or why, whatever event it is. They don't really even
Sure.
explain that, but I felt like I needed to explain it. I wanted there to be some rationale to it. So that's what I do have in the book about what the conditions are that cause the time travel. And that was kind of fun to write, even though might have been, that might have been the biggest challenge, but it was also fun. So,
Without giving too much away, what did cause the time travel?
well, the nickel played a part in it, but it wasn't the only part.
The nickel being the train.
The nickel being an actual nickel, so it's called the
Oh,
nickel loop
okay.
because it is an actual nickel that they both have, and it's it's a specific nickel from a certain time, but that wasn't the only the only condition that ended up being and becomes the mystery of, it worked before, why can't I get back, that type of thing. But there was a condition they hadn't yet realized that was also coexisting at the same time.
Yeah. Wow. Well, putting aside the mechanics of time travel and some of the other aspects of that, what did you learn writing wise or anything to do with just sort of how you approached putting together the novel between Whispers for Terra and the Nickeloop?
I'd like to hope that people that read both books would see that the writing craft advanced. Um, I went through, not for the entire book, but I was utilizing a group of critiquers through Rocky Mountain fiction writers that met at Panera down in Littleton, and they were so amazing. I mean, it's a pretty vulnerable experience to step into a critique group, but they always had um, effective feedback and were very kind about it and pointed out positive things. So that really helped. I felt like the editor I utilized was much more detailed than the one I'd had for Whispers for Terra. And I tried to learn more about character development. I did learn more. I didn't just try. I learned more about character development and the arc of the main character. So there was a lot of craft that was kind of evolving at the same time that required me to adjust and readjust the story because I need more of that in there. Or yeah, so I feel like, and I've had people comment that they do feel that the writing is just better crafted than the first story. The first story is really fun, and I still stand by my first story in Whispers for Terra, but I do feel like it's better written this time.
Yeah. It's often hard to really nail down what that means, that the writing is better.
Right.
It's sort of elusive to
Mhm.
be. Can you be a little more specific? Was it something in particular about the way you approached dialogue? Was it something in particular you approached about character description, or was it just more in your thinking on a macro level about the hero's journey, the main character's journey?
I think, that was a piece of it, but I think some of the sentence structure, I could start to see a shift in the way I would word things and the use of words. I started to feel, and I would go back and reread like an old section that I had written, I'd say a few months before or something, and I could see where, and of course we can all self-edit our books till the cows come home, but I could see where there was a change and a shift. So, and I had it, yeah, I intended to have it proofread and get all the kinds of edits done, but I could see a difference in it over time. So there was that too, but pulling a lot of that together and not leaving so many loose ends. Although I could still find a couple that I kind of put something on the table and didn't come back to it. But for the most part, I felt like I wrapped up or circled back to some of those seeds that I dropped and finished them off. So there were just a lot of things. I really feel better about it. So,
So basically, it sounds like you're ramping up and improving on many, many aspects, or if not all
right.
aspects.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I hadn't been much for tropes in stories and in romance and got guidance that in a romance, people expect their tropes. And I refuse to use the third act breakup. That just drives me crazy. And or the, miscommunication as the reason for the separation. But I tried to build in, some more of that because I'm I yeah, tropes, I guess they're necessary and people know what to expect from them, but they're not always my favorite thing to adhere to, I guess.
Hard to balance giving readers what they want versus the artist, you know,
Right.
expressing herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Interesting. So in terms of research, 1938, how about telling us about how you managed the research? Did you go online? What did you spend time in Glenwood Springs? Did you ask around? Did you what did you
Every everything you're saying. I spent a lot of time online looking at some old newspapers and not just Glenwood Springs, but trying to get the era. I connected with an author who writes historical fiction in England. Her name popped up, and I found out that zippers weren't, women weren't using zippers at that time, even though they were parts of men's clothing. Um, but I did spend a couple different visits in Glenwood Springs, and I met with the archivist at the time at the Glenwood Museum, and she was extremely helpful. And I went down into the archives and looked at photos and really discovered what a hub and thriving area that Glenwood Springs was at the time. And I can remember sitting in a critique group and somebody saying, that there wouldn't have been those kind of cars in 1938, or Glenwood Springs wouldn't have had that, but it was a hub for all the outlying areas at the time. So I did a lot of that, and I spent a lot of time researching food of the day, and debating with somebody if potato chips and peanut butter were, so really just really trying to find out what was authentic to the time and the era. And that was fun. I could spend much more time. Probably the thing, and I wrote about this on a blog, that organizing that information better so I could re-find it another time, because it's on my laptop, it's on my notes and my phone, it's on pieces of paper, it's everywhere. And I would definitely advise people, and probably everybody else knew this but me, but to have it just be more organized so that you can access it to double check information more easily. Because I probably spent way too much time tracking it down a second time. So
Yeah, yeah. I could see that happening to me
mm,
unless you're super organized, because what you don't know when you'll need something and you want to,
right.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So,
How about just the whole aspect of bringing the book into the daylight and publishing it? Were there things you learned from book one to book two? Things you did differently second time around?
well, my author ego wasn't as fragile as it was the first time. That first book, you're so vulnerable and you just want people to love it. And then you get that review, or that feedback. And I felt much stronger with that, and welcomed the feedback, even the things that people were resisting or whatever. But yeah, I knew I had to reacquaint myself, because it had been 3 solid years since I had published. And so I had to reacquaint myself with kind of the sequence of things. But it didn't take longer. And I was also in another group, a couple other groups where people had indie published more recently and could remind me of that. So it was a much more pleasurable and not as painstaking of experience as the first one was. So it was, yeah, it was fun. And then I got on TikTok, and I was trying to promote on there, as well as the Instagram and all of that. And I feel like I did a better job with promotion ahead of time. And I knew I already had a newsletter base, so I had that going. So I did pre-orders, and I had quite a high number of pre-orders. That was fun to do. Uh, so yeah, it was just a lot more comfortable experience, and much more delightful of an experience. So
So you enjoy all that behind the scenes kind of
yeah, the
production.
ramping up part is stressful but fun. There were a lot of last minute glitches, of course, getting it uploaded onto Ingram Spark, or getting the final format for EPUB and all of that. Because I am happy to pay somebody to do that formatting. I just don't want the learning curve of figuring that out, even though I know that everything saves some dollars, but I'd much rather have somebody else do that. But yeah, the afterward marketing, is a daunting. I think it's daunting for anybody, no matter whether you're indie or traditionally published. It's a big undertaking to keep that momentum up, and keep it going, and keep it out in front of people. And that's really probably more the place
Hmm.
I find effort. I want it to just flare and happen, and doesn't necessarily do that. That's for some people. I've known people who have
Yeah,
had that instantaneous success, but not many.
yeah. Can you talk a little bit about just your options around editing and cover design, things like that?
Um, I liked the person who, well, my sister-in-law had done the original Whispers for Terra, which I thought was great, but I noticed that when it was next to other books, the font didn't stand out. So I ended up having somebody redo the front cover to make it pop more. And so I used him the second time. I was really happy with the cover right off the bat, with a couple subtle changes. And his name is Steve Novak, and he is just online and he's pretty inexpensive, which I think is great. And he's quick and he was willing to, rework and rework. I just was, I'm probably an easier customer. A lot of people know exactly what they want, and I didn't go into it with that kind of vision. So maybe I was simpler, but editing was somebody that I had bought a self-editing program from to run yourself through self-editing. And I went through it with a friend. And so I have no other people who use Stacy Juba is their name. And they liked the work that she did. And I was in a group, and actually it's her book. I might, that I would recommend to people that Kat Caldwell, she does podcasts and editing and all sorts of things. And she was really, just so helpful in reminding me of all the steps along the way. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. That's great. So you've mentioned several times along the way different groups. It
Mm-hmm.
sounds like you really believe, as do I, in the power of writing friends.
Right. Um, yeah, I am in Michigan now, but I still think Rocky Mountain Fiction is just a amazing group of supportive people with such diversity among them. And the online ones, there was two other women that I self-published with my first book that up until just recently, we'd met once a week and we were supportive. We didn't write together, but we kind of kept each other accountable for moving ahead with things or, getting ideas for reaching out to people for reviews and that type of thing. And then there was another group that Kat Caldwell started that we've just continued on that we're just all friends with. And it's 4 or 5 of us online and nearly 3 to 4 days a week for
Wow.
varying lengths of time, but not necessarily always writing. Just sometimes people are at different stages, marketing or newsletters and all of that, just to keep us really moving forward with things. I think it's so important because that's why I think so many people they lose momentum, they get busy, nobody necessarily knows they're doing it or has the same level of enthusiasm or passion about it that keeps you writing, keeps you sitting down in front of that computer and going for it. So yeah, I think the writing groups are essential. At least they
Yeah.
are for me.
Yeah. Encouragement and accountability, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, before we get to your book recommendations, what's next for you in terms of what's the next project?
Well, there's another, I'm thinking about a novella, but there's a time travel that has to do with something current, sciency that, could be occurring in our world and that I'm thinking about writing with. But um, so I haven't jumped back into it. Not to go down this path, but at the time that my book was releasing, I had a sister also pass away. And so that kind of knocked the wind out of the sails with
Mhm.
it for quite a bit of time. And I'm really just trying to gear back up to get back into really the marketing aspect of it and trying to kind of look around and figure out. Plus, I have all of her old journals, and she was 7 years older than me. So just enough to know, not to know her when she was in some of her younger years. We were great friends later, but I'm curious about just reading those journals and seeing what stories might build from that. And although some people might say, no, don't read them, they're too private. She kept them.
Yeah.
She wasn't
Yeah.
going to read them. Somebody can read mine. I'd be okay with that. So,
Sure. Yeah. I guess fair game.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Very good. Well, let's wrap up with a couple of book or one or I think you said you have two book recommendations.
I do. One is Kat Caldwell. She's written a number of books, and it's Kat with a C-A-T, Caldwell. And one book is Bended Loyalty. that more recently came out, but one of hers that she wrote some time ago called was Stepping Across the Desert was historical fiction. And I loved that one, but she's a great mentor and she's yeah, but I really enjoy her writing, very well crafted writing. And then another one is called, it's not, it's would be nonfiction. I'm not even sure. Inspirational, maybe is the genre it would be in. It's called A Year in Balance, a spiritual guide to finding your next right step. And it's really just every day of the year, there's a quote by somebody famous that you've heard of. There's her section of what that means to her and why, what to think about that day, and then a guiding question for journaling or meditating or just contemplating. And I've shared this book with probably 4 or 5 people where we look at it every day or every few days, and we text back and forth about what that means to us today. So it's a way of connecting with yourself and with other people. And that one's by Angela Caminos Kohler is her name. And she's actually a local Michigan writer. I haven't met her, but I had seen something in a bookstore for that. And I've connected with her since then, but she's a life coach, yoga instructor, probably a very cool woman. So those would be the two I recommend.
Excellent. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for this rundown. Good luck out there with the nickel loop and good luck with your next projects as well.
Can I ask what you've been doing? Is there a moment for you?
Oh, well, I'm on here every week or so, and so that would just get repetitive.
Okay.
Yeah, audience. But I do have a new book coming out in on May 1st.
Hmm.
Thomas and Mercer, a new thriller called No Lie Lasts Forever. And it's the
Oh,
start of a new thriller series. So
hmm.
yeah, I appreciate your asking, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I do appreciate it. And we will, maybe you'll head out to Colorado Gold next September for the
Yeah, I kept my membership up and I couldn't make it this year, but it would be fun to go back next year.
great. Good. Well, again, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. This was fun again.